Welcome to r/entitled people, where we share stories from your lives about people who think the rules don't apply to them, and they should get what they want. Thank you, friends, for subscribing to the channel, and for so many likes. And today we have 3 great stories, so subscribe, hit the like button, and let's begin. The first story, Revenge in a Neighborly Way. The second story, The Day I Stood Up to My Unfair Boss, From Shipments to Showdown. The third story, The company lost 2 important employees at the same time, and now they're in a panic. The first story is entitled Traffic Blocker Getting a Dose of His Own Medicine. This is a story from an overseas neighbor of mine. We met many years ago on IRC. My friend also discovered Reddit and wanted this story out there, so asked me if I would be willing to write it, and I figured why not. Backstory. My friend runs his own private company, even has a few people on the payroll, and during the day of the incident, he had an important meeting with a potential customer of theirs. He and several other companies got invited to see what they could offer the client, and that day one of them would be picked for the job at hand, and thus gain a very lucrative contract. Unfortunately, my friend got stuck in traffic due to climate activists, and thus missed his meeting, and his only chance on securing this contract worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. Needless to say that my friend was PO'd tremendously. Even though things were going pretty well for his company, there's still this issue of a recession going on. So yeah, within context, this still was a major setback for them. He tried to contact the police to see if he could somehow file a report or protest against the actions, but that turned out to be fruitless. That evening, he decided to watch the news to learn more about these, quote, bloody eco-terrorists while having one too many beers. That's when it happened. He recognized one of the roadblockers, a guy who lived in the same neighborhood 2 streets over. At first, he figured he'd go pay the man a visit to discuss the errors of his ways. But that got immediately shut down by his wife. But he was still seething and scheming. The plot thickens. The next day, he made sure to print out the pictures he had of the guy being involved with the road blocking, and went to visit the guy's neighbors. Sure enough, they confirmed that the guy on the picture was most definitely the neighbor. While he pretty much kept to himself, he was known to be pretty insufferable at times, especially when Mr. Entitled was too sure about being right for his own good. Public parking? Nah, of course the parking space in front of his house is his own, and thus should be kept empty. Stuff like that. But the neighbors all agreed that this blocking of traffic was beyond entitled. They should teach him a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. And then his next-door neighbor, now part of the group, suddenly said, if only we could block him in for a change. Wait a second. Another neighbor soon had a brilliant idea. They could, but it wouldn't be free, and the next-door neighbor would also be somewhat inconvenienced. He didn't care about that at all, and thus the plan was set in motion. The revenge. See, this particular neighbor had a cousin working for a big construction company. So the group pooled money together. The neighbor contacted his cousin and explained what was going on, and they hired an industrial dumpster for 48 hours. After the cousin learned about the whole story, he talked things through with his boss, and lo and behold, this company also suffered from the protests, so they were quite motivated to help. The group of neighbors wouldn't be excessively charged, only the involved costs minus a very small fee due to tax reasons, and free priority delivery that very same afternoon. Sure enough, a huge deep loader made its way into the street. After contacting more neighbors, no one had any problems moving their cars out of the way, and the dumpster/container was placed with only a meter or so to spare, precisely in front of the neighbor's house, right at the front door, which opened towards the inside. In other words, it was sorta possible to enter and leave the house on your own if you squeezed through a bit, but that was also basically it. The sidewalk was pretty much completely blocked off. This also blocked the front view of the next-door neighbor, but he obviously couldn't care less, though his wife did protest him. And then the group went across the street. They grabbed several folding chairs, a table was set down, and plenty of beer and sodas were brought. The group had themselves a small party in anticipation of what would come next. You can't block me, that's illegal. As expected, later that afternoon, the neighbor got home wearing a huge backpack, and he was not happy to see this container in front of his house. He was peeved. When he spotted the group laughing at him, he went over there and was told that the company made a small mistake with regard to the size of the container, but that he shouldn't worry. At least he could still get inside his house. Then the neighbors started protesting and said the words in the header, to which the group brought out the pictures of him blocking traffic. That's different, he said. Of course it was. So the guy called the police. Of course he would. But you know what the problem is if you contact the police almost every week to complain about non-issues, such as a car parking fully legally in front of your house on a public street? It seems they'll lose their motivation to come help you or believe you, because no police showed up that day despite him calling several times. Seething angry, the guy stormed inside. Well, tried to, because he managed to get his backpack stuck between the house and the container, which obviously caused much cheering and laughing from the group. But Mr. Entitled did manage to get in, after he took off his backpack. The next day, the next-door neighbor, next to Mr. Entitled, got a visit from 2 police officers who had questions about the container. The neighbor briefly explained the bogus story about how the company shipped the wrong size container, and how they would resolve the matter soon enough. He also told the officers that the neighbor across the street had handled the actual renting, so he and one of the officers went to visit that neighbor, the one with the cousin who arranged the dumpster. This neighbor told the officers that he/they had rented that container for 48 hours and showed them the papers. However, he kept the official documents together with the photo of the neighbor. So when the police officer had looked at the receipt, he then looked at the picture and suddenly he too recognized the entitled neighbor. "Wait a second, isn't that your neighbor?" the officer asked, to which they nodded. "So you guys blocked a traffic blocker?" the officer asked, bursting out in laughter for a brief moment but soon correcting himself. "Just so we're clear, can you guys guarantee that this thing is gone tomorrow?" he asked with a stern voice, to which they both said yes. "Okay, that'll do for now, but don't make us come back," the officer said, and then went back to his colleague. "Mr. Entitled, we all know we need here. We're going back to the station to file a report about this. We'll also contact the company which this container belongs to, and we'll tell them to remove this as soon as possible." The officer told the entitled neighbor, "I'm sure we'll have this all cleared up by tomorrow." And they left. Mr. Entitled did call the police a few more times that day, but apparently was always told that his complaint was being processed. Mr. Entitled also didn't get any mail nor packages that day, because the moment the mailman walked up to his house, he did look at the door, but soon decided to walk past. The next day, the construction company sent the deep loader again to pick up the dumpster, and that was the end of the story. Sorta. The pickup didn't go entirely smoothly, because one neighbor refused to move his car for 10 to 15 minutes or so, because when I'll park it again, this moron is probably going to scold me as usual. He told the driver of the deep loader with Mr. Entitled present, who saw red with anger, but couldn't really do much. But eventually the container got removed. The 2 officers came back later that day to check, and also told both neighbors that they got an official warning not to pull something like this again, and that was the end of the story. Mr. Entitled was now officially known as Mr. Hypocrite in the neighborhood, and people started to openly mock him about his actions. The guy eventually moved several months later because people did not like him anymore. Oh, the sweet symphony of karmic justice, orchestrated by none other than Mr. Entitled himself. This tale of a neighborhood showdown is a masterpiece of pettiness and poetic revenge. Picture this OP friends-turned-neighborhood hero, armed with photographic evidence and the determination to teach Mr. Entitled a lesson he'd never forget. It's like a modern-day vigilante tale, but instead of capes and masks, it's all about industrial dumpsters and cunning neighbors. As Mr. Entitled's rage builds, his futile calls to the police paint a picture of desperation, one that's met with chuckles from officers who've had quite enough of his trivial complaints. The container, a symbol of his own hypocrisy, looms ominously in front of his house, blocking not just his view, but also his path to reason. The climax, when the container is removed, but not without some neighborly resistance, is the icing on the cake. It's like watching a sitcom unfold in real life, complete with comedic timing and perfectly placed stubbornness. In the end, Mr. Entitled's reputation crumbles faster than a house of cards in a hurricane, and in the end he packs his bags and moves away. We couldn't imagine a better ending to this neighborly showdown. Could we imagine a better ending to this neighborly confrontation? The second story is, told my boss not my problem. 18, at the time now 22, about 4 years ago, I worked shipment in the mornings at Banana Republic, got paid around $10.42 an hour, and had to be there at 5 a.m. for shipments, and was the only dumb A that would work this shift. New program comes up where you can become a specialist and work longer shifts, and since I was part-time, I signed up. We were supposed to have a meeting with the store manager to explain the new responsibilities and potential raise. However, meeting was postponed and never happened. They give me the shifts and I had no problem with it, since I barely got hours and needed some extra money. Hours went from 12 a week to 30. 3 weeks later, store manager comes to clock in. 3 hours late, by the way, after a big holiday shipment, and see that all the clothes weren't fully processed. Normal shipments are about 30 to 40 boxes. This shipment was about 140. It was an hour shift that started at 5 a.m., and I had no one else to help me except the shipment manager. But she has to start setting up the store at 8 a.m. to open at 9 a.m., so I had to process everything for more than half my shift. Obviously, I wasn't going to finish everything. I'm sitting in the back waiting for my ride, and the manager sees me and asks, "What's all this?" I immediately responded with, "I don't know, I've clocked out," and starts yelling at me that I'm the specialist, and that I signed up for this, and was telling me I couldn't leave until I finished all of it. I popped off and told her it wasn't my problem. I was never told my exact responsibilities. Didn't get a pay raise, not even a change in my official job title. So I just left after telling her it isn't my problem she never came in, when I had a shift after that whole ordeal. She came to work drunk, never showed up on time, and not long after that she ended up getting fired for time theft because she would clock herself in on days she didn't come in. Absolutely, it's incredibly frustrating when a manager acts entitled and tries to pass off their responsibilities onto someone else, especially without clear communication or compensation. Your response was a perfect way to highlight the absurdity of the situation. I've clocked out as a brilliant way to assert that you were no longer on the clock and not obligated to continue working under those conditions. It's even more satisfying to hear that karma caught up with this manager. It's a lesson in accountability and responsibility, as they ended up getting fired for their own misconduct, including time theft. It just goes to show that abusing power and being irresponsible in a position of authority often leads to a downfall. Your story serves as a reminder that standing up for yourself and not accepting unfair treatment can lead to positive outcomes. In this case, justice prevailed, and the entitled manager faced the consequences of their actions. Well done, OP. The third story is, coworker took on a manager's workload for 1 year after being promised a raise and a promotion. Resigned because, surprise, it didn't happen. 3 years ago, our team used to have 3 people. Our manager, my coworker, and me. Workload was balanced and we get along well with each other. It was great. Then our manager resigned for a better position elsewhere. Management promised to find a replacement, and they'd appreciate it if both of us can split her duties between us for now. We shrugged because it really wasn't too bad back during COVID. A few months later, they never did replace her. No response after poking and prodding. Then blindsided us that they no longer have the headcount. More responsibilities piled up as a business returned to normal. Our workload were increasing week after week. I declined taking on more by citing how full my current plate is. My coworker, however, was oddly jumping at the chance of taking on more projects, small to big, more often than not manager-level stuff, attending so much meetings and working with our stakeholders. Despite how he's already overtiming during the weekends just to catch up, it was noticeable. He's gotten more and more tired and snappy due to the stress. But perhaps they were grooming him to be your successor. Management was not my cup of tea for now, so I was happy for him. Then he submitted his resignation just last month. Lasted almost 1.5 years. I found out later via the grapevine was that he was denied the promotion this year, and so he found another place with better benefits, salary, and a functioning team. Not surprising at all. As for myself, during his handover, I was informed I would be taking on his workload alongside my current one. So in total, I would have 2 executives and 1 manager's responsibilities. No talk of raise, promotion, or even when they'd get a replacement. So obviously not being stupid, I started looking elsewhere. I was prepared to be unemployed as I was sure as hell wasn't staying even without getting a new job. But I got lucky with 2 interviews just within the week of sending out applications. Received a great offer just 1 week after submitting my resignation letter, with a 35% raise and better benefits. My last day is next week. The department is low-key panicking, as they can't find someone else to replace us both so soon. They've resorted to give the workload to 2 other contract staff, who were hired for something else and did not expect this. Obviously, they were not happy, and I try to complete my handover with them to the best of my abilities. I'll never understand what management expected from this decision. Most likely, your bosses really thought you were idiots. They thought that they could just shove all the responsibilities of 3 positions onto 1 person and it would be fine. Or then it would be resolved in a fancy way. But it didn't work out and they paid the price. I hope they lose as much as possible after your dismissal. That's what they really deserve with the way they treat their employees. You know, this is the situation with the arrogant management decided to save on salaries for new employees, and as a result they will lose much more. Hit the like button to support the channel and subscribe. Have a good day.